Welcome back to American Lit 1. Tonight we're going to be talking about Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. This is a poem written in what is called trochaic octameter. Trochee being the term for a metrical foot, which is the emphases, with a short sound, with a long sound followed by a short sound. And 8, octameter being 8 of these metrical feet per line. For example, once upon a midnight dreary while I pondered meek and the long and the short. But let's get into the poem here. We've talked about the technical aspects. Let's talk about the poem itself. This was Poe's greatest hit. This is what launched him as a sensation. Gave him the ability to do so many reading tours and that sort of thing. Now, we've heard about in our previous video about Poe's background, Rufus Griswold, who was his executor and also apparently his enemy. See, Poe was something of a fierce literary critic and had slammed one of Griswold's works. Okay. Why Poe chose to make him his executor, I have no idea. However, there is some suspicion, some speculation among scholars that perhaps they were closer friends than we think. Right? The idea of Poe as this sort of gothic, dark figure wandering through graveyards at night and sick and sallow was actually the product of Rufus Griswold's writing and his biography of Poe. And it's also what launched Poe's career. It's all a fiction. It was actually not anything quite like that. He grew up in a fair amount of privilege up until his time at West Point and his time in the military, until he got out on his own and became kind of a hot mess. But this poem, The Raven, also probably lends a lot to that reading of him. So let's go through it here. It starts out a guy just sitting at home at night, sitting up late one night, reading, drowsing over his reading desk. He's just doing nothing really but kind of entertaining himself. And then suddenly there's this knocking at the door. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as one were gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more." Immediately he's dismissive that there's anything strange going on, because you don't expect anything supernatural to happen. That's what makes it so exciting and fascinating, especially in these stories. Distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December. Okay, now winter. This is significant. Winter is, well, it comes with it the sense of death, right? In the fall, things begin to die off. The world changes. It turns cold. And cold is associated with the grave and death. And in Greek mythology, the earth begins to die in winter because Persephone has gone down to the underworld. And her mother, Demeter, the goddess of nature, is grieving for her. Persephone has to spend, there was an agreement worked out between the gods that Persephone could spend spring and summer with her mother, and in the fall, as time began to grow near, Demeter begins to grieve. And finally, in the winter, Persephone has gone home to her husband. And so the world becomes cold and dead. Okay, so and each separate dying ember wrought its own ghost on the floor. Okay. Early I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the loss of Lenore. Okay, so here it is. Here we have a sense of things. What's happening is he's staying up late and he's reading because he's in grief. He is grieving over the loss of a woman named Lenore. Right? How often do we escape into a better world, or a less challenging or painful one, by engaging in fiction, reading books, going to movies, distractions to help us to get away from our grief? He says, From my bookcase, surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. Yes, she was beautiful and radiant, and the angels have named her Lenore, else no one would have. No one did at all. And she's gone. And the silken and uncertain rustling of the purple curtain thrilled me and filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, to some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating at my chamber door, 'tis this, this it is, and nothing more. Right? Here's a knock at the door, and he thinks, okay, yeah, it's just some late night visitor, but it startles him out of his reverie, out of his reading. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. Sir, said I, or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly came a tapping at my chamber door, that scarce I was sure I heard you, and here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Okay. His manners and his thoughts are still about him. He realizes, oh well, there's been an affront here. I'm so sorry. Hey, I'm coming. The door is you caught me napping, and here, please let me let you in. But he opens the door. There's no one there. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token. And only one word was spoken, with the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and echo murmured back the word Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. So he's standing there, and he's looking out into the darkness, and maybe they went away. Is there someone there? I can't see them. And then he hears a whisper, the word Lenore. The name of the woman he loved and lost, and it so fills his thoughts these days, so occupies his mind. Lenore. Right? Here it begins to get a little bit disturbing, right? Who would be speaking out there? We don't know. Is it the voice of his grief? Is it something else? We're not sure. Open here I flung the shutter when, with many flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with the mine or lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched on a bust of Pallas, just above my door, above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Okay. Now, this is significant. He goes and he throws open the window, and then, because he hears a rapping at the window, and suddenly a raven just pops into the room. Okay. Now, I don't know if you remember the movie The Crow or any of its sequels, but that movie draws on the belief that ravens, crows, are psychopomps. They're messengers from the dead, that they can carry news from the news of deceased persons to those here on the other side of the veil. And suddenly this bird just appears, flies into his, hops into his house, then lands and alights on a bust of Pallas, which is the other name for Athena. She was the goddess of war, wisdom, truth. And there's a sense of Greek mythology here as well. There's a nod to Greek mythology because, and we'll discuss that a little further, but in the meantime, the bust lands on the statue of Athena and just rests there. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling. Oh, that's what it was. It was just a bird. By the grave and stern decorum of his countenance it wore. This is just perfect. He's a bird dressed in black, and here I am, a black bird, dressed on it, because funeral clothes traditionally are black, lands on this bust of a Greek goddess. I mean, this scene is just almost too good to be true. It's humorous in its scope. And he says, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art no craven, ghastly grim, an ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Okay. Now let's unpack that a little bit. Ghastly, grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Right. Tell me what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore. Plutonian shore. Now this is the shore of Hades. Pluto in the Roman rendering is the god Hades, the god of the dead. Okay. And there's a river that separates the living and the dead. It's the river Lethe, the river of forgetting. When Charon the boatman ferries you across to the other side, to Hades, you must cross this river. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever was blessed with seeing a bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as nevermore. I couldn't help but marvel at this. I was impressed, in awe of this, because this has never happened to anyone. Clearly, no human being alive has had a bird, a raven, come and roost above his door on the bust of Pallas, let alone with a name called Nevermore. A bird named Nevermore. There was never a bird named Nevermore. So the incredulousness of the speaker here, he's remarking on how unlikely this scene is, how almost vaguely comical. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only the one word, as if his soul in that word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. He says, okay, well, he says the word as if he's pouring out his soul. It is the entirety of him, his truth, his everything, by saying this word nevermore. And he goes, oh, well, he'll just probably be here for the night. He'll fly off like birds do, some other place to be. He'll grow bored, and certainly by tomorrow, like so many friends and all my other hopes and dreams, he'll fly away too. But the bird rejoins, nevermore. Huh. So what do we think of this? What does this mean? So now it's becoming a bit ominous, isn't it? As if the bird can read his thoughts. He's thinking, oh, well, the bird will leave tomorrow. He won't stick around. He'll like all my hopes and dreams. And this is all going on internally in the speaker's head. And the bird rejoins, nevermore. So we have a sense that it's growing more ominous, more startling here as the verses go, as the lines progress. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store. Caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. They're saying, surely this is just coincidence. Ravens and crows actually can imitate speech. They can learn words. They can, not to the degree that parrots or mynas or others can, but they can be taught a few simple words. And so he's thinking, that's what happened. This is someone's pet who's gotten out. And the reason he says this word, he's been very unfortunate in life until he used that word over and over again. The bird just kind of picked up on it. That must be what it is. The next stanza goes, but the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled and cushioned seat in front of the bird and bust and door. There upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking, what is this ominous bird of yore? What this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. What he's saying here is, this amused me at first, but then I got to be thinking about it. So I pulled a chair over in front of the door to look at the bird, and there, as I sunk down in my chair, I started to think, what could this mean? When he says fancy unto fancy, he's letting his imagination run wild. He's he's entertaining ideas here. Thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant by croaking nevermore. Maybe there's more going on here than I think. Maybe the bird is trying to tell me something. And so, what could it be? So it progresses a little bit in the next stanza here. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to this fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining, and the lamplight gloated o'er. But whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by angels whose faint footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by the angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe from the memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And so he begins to put it together. He says, I caught the faint whiff of perfume of some unseen angel swinging a censer, and you see these sometimes in Catholic rituals. They have the little container of incense, and they swing it back and forth, distributing the fragrance throughout the world, throughout the room there. And then he begins to cry out to the bird for mercy. He goes, please give me respite. Please give me peace from these memories of Lenore. When he says nepenthe, that's from Greek mythology as well. It's a potion that's meant to assuage grief. It's meant to pass from you. So in the next stanza, prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, and of bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed here upon the shore, desolate and undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home of horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore, quoth the raven, nevermore. Okay. So what he's doing here is making an inquiry about the afterlife. Is there a heaven beyond? Is there peace? Is there a place beyond here? Is there the balm in Gilead? Balm in Gilead is a reference from the Bible. There's an old spiritual called "There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sick soul." Right? Balm in Gilead is the healing that human beings will receive as they pass on to their reward if they've been good, if they've followed the teachings of Christ. And he's asking, is there a balm in Gilead? Is there hope beyond this world? Is there something more? The raven says, nevermore. Okay. Prophet, said I, and thing of evil, prophet still the bird, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, and by God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore, quoth the raven, nevermore. So he implores the the raven, in the name of God, whom we are both servants of, whom we both love. Is Lenore in heaven? Have you spoken to her? Is she in the afterlife? Is she there? Quoth the raven, nevermore. Now it's left up to us too. The one reading could possibly be, there is no afterlife. Another could be that, well, there is, but she's not there. Or perhaps most chilling and most disturbing of all is, I'm not going to tell you. It is not for man to know what lies beyond the veil of death. I am here. I'm a representative. I am come from the other side, but I won't tell you anything. And you can see how this would be incredibly maddening. That's why this poem plays so much on the psychology. We all have a sort of innate fear of death to some degree, anyway. It may abate or increase as time goes by, but there is this terror, this fear of the unknown too. Person of faith will relax and say, you know what, I know what's waiting on the other side. I know what I've been told. I know what I've been taught, what I've read in the Bible. But no one has ever come back. So there's no 100% unequivocal scientific proof. Right? At this point, it's all a matter of faith, which makes this particular poem so troubling, so disturbing. Because we have ostensibly a representative from the other side coming back. And he says, oh, well, are my loved ones there? Is there something beyond? Is there something on the other side? Is there a heaven? And he goes, not telling. It's not for you to know. Not this side. Not this side of death. So let's continue. At this point, the speaker in the poem becomes angry. He's had enough. He's been pushed too far, and he says, be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked up starting. Get thee back to thy tempest, into the night's Plutonian shore. So the next stanza, our speaker, the voice in the poem is at his wit's end. He's had enough. He's not going to take any more. He goes, be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked up starting. Get thee back into thy tempest, and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume a token of that lie that soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart. Take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Right? Okay. So he says, look, that's enough. I don't want any more of your foolishness. I don't want any more of your teasing. Leave and leave no trace of yourself here. Go back to the shores of death and the afterlife from which you came. Just go. And the late raven says, nevermore. No. And this could tell us a few things. You could read this a few ways. You can read this as the dead will always be with us, or at least the specter of death, or that perhaps the bird is a representative of death himself, come to claim Poe, or the speaker. Yes. And the raven never flitting is still sitting, and on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the damp light o'er him streaming throws his shadows on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Now, there's something to consider. The poem ends with Poe lying down, right? Which is pretty good testimony that the character dies in the end. The voice of the poem ends his life there, that the raven is a harbinger of his own death, right? Okay. And we think about the action here. He goes from sitting to standing to lying down. Right? Which, if you consider it, it's kind of the cycle of life in a way. You know? Another thing too, the poem is meant to replicate or at least reference the myth of Prometheus. Prometheus was the Greek god who gave fire to mankind. Prometheus was a sort of inventor of the gods. He would build things for them. And he built the original human beings, and they walked the earth, and the winter came, he would see that they were freezing, and he was concerned about them like any good creator would be. And so he stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind so he wouldn't shiver in the winter and be cold all the time. Well, the gods, they got angry about this because, hey, you've taken our stuff and given it to people that it was never meant to. It was never meant for. So what they did is they chained him to a rock. And at night, every day, these massive birds would come and pluck out his liver, which would magically regrow overnight. And the next day, the whole painful cycle would begin again. Right? And in truth, the bird does torment the speaker in the poem. He torments him first. He appears innocuous at first, and then torments him with the knowledge that he has and the knowledge that he will not reveal. And so what do you think? Do you think that the speaker in the poem dies? He is lying there at the end of the poem in front of the door. Now this could be a matter of physical collapse or stress, but I think there's a good argument to be made that this is the end of the speaker's life. Right? There's that whisper in the darkness, Lenore, and then every question he puts to the bird, nevermore. He says, leave me, he goes, nevermore. Yeah. See, throughout Greek mythology, when human beings meet the boatman, there's not a lot of conversation on that boat ride across the River Lethe. No. You don't get to ask death questions. You don't get to question death or interrogate him about what is to come. So, okay. In many ways, this is a poem, actually in every way, this is a poem about grief. Everybody that Poe loved died. His father left when he was just a baby, and a year later his mother died. His stepfather died. The love of his life died. And so if everybody dies on you, everybody you care about dies, you kind of start to take it personally, don't you? You feel like death maybe has it in for you or is stalking you. And so perhaps this is his shout into the void. This is Poe screaming at death, what do you want from me? What is there at least some hope beyond this world? And the answer that he received is the same answer we all receive, if we ask. Now, those of us who are people of faith, of course, you have the sense, yes, there's something beyond here, and there's really not that much to worry about. This life is just a journey, and at the end is the reward. But there's no solid evidence. Right? There's no scientific proof, nothing tangible that you get your hand around, or get your hands on, or that you could say unequivocally, okay, yes, there is something beyond death. And so we have our speaker here challenging death, questioning it, and then finally, perhaps in the end, gaining a full knowledge of it. Okay, so our next video will be about The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Hope you're enjoying this. This is a fascinating work, one of my favorites, and he is not only one of our greatest writers, he's also the father of the American mystery, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in a different video. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.